that. So now everything's unpacked and ready to grab from Blender. So let's hop over to Blender now. Okay, so the next step that we want to do in the process is to set up our Blender scene so that it has everything the way we want it to begin working on this. So I did a video on how to save your own startup file. And when I start Blender, my startup file is a plane with backface culling on the back so I can see what side of the mesh the normal is pointing from. So if you don't know what that is, I'll link to my video in the description on how to set that up and turn on that setting, but basically it's up here in the top right. In viewport shading down here you have backface culling. You can check that on or off to be able to see the invisible sides of mesh. So anyway, I have this as my default because a lot of things I start with a plane. In this case, I'm going to not be starting with a plane. I'm just going to delete this. So I'm going to hit X to delete. And then we're going to go over to the properties panel here on the right hand side. Go to the camera icon where it says render properties. And we want to make sure that the render engine is cycles because we will not be working in Eevee. We want to be able to bake in cycles. So just make sure you have that so you can work with nodes and bake your texture and all of that. Okay, so at this point we're not going to worry about the PBR or HDR files that we downloaded just yet. We're going to get to those later. The next step in the process is going to be to model the object. Now if you've already got an object built up, you can just jump in after this part is over with, but I figured I would throw in a little, modeling tutorial, I guess, for this simple object. So the look that I'm going for is something like a log holder, just to give you an idea, and I'm not going to copy any of these exactly. I'm just going to do a simple basic one, something metallic, with a couple of logs inside. Mine's not going to be this fancy. So to start modeling the log holder, I'm going to add a cylinder. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a cylinder. So I'm going to use the shortcut Shift holding A and go to cylinder. And now I have this fixed cylinder here. I'm going to, before I click off of the cylinder, I'm not going to click off of it yet. I still have it selected and I am in object mode. On the bottom left side, there's a little menu here called Add Cylinder, and it has some settings that come along with the cylinder once it's rezzed. So I'm going to just keep this at 32. I'm really not shooting for low prim here, modeling it. This is just to show you the texturing process. So I won't, take away any vertices here. I'm just going to leave it as is, but I am going to choose on cap fill type nothing, because I want to be able to deal with that on my own, and I'm going to go with this. So now I can click off and click back, and I don't need to get those settings back. So before I start, I'm going to right click and choose Shade Smooth, because that takes away the visibility of some of the edges of the faces around the cylinder and gives more of a smooth appearance. That's a personal preference, so you don't want to do that, but I do that with all of my smooth faces. So I'm just going to jump in and start modeling this into some kind of a rack for the metal part of the log holder. So I'm going to tab into edit mode, and I want to rotate this so I can get it facing me. So I'm going to rotate it on the x-axis. So I'm going to hit R for rotate, and then right away hit X for the x-axis, and then I'm going to hit 90 for 90 degrees and hit enter. And that is how I was able to rotate that on the x-axis. So if you can imagine looking at the log holder from my perspective, that's the orientation I want. Now I'm just going to start going. I'm going to hit S for scale, and I'm going to constrain it, well, S and Y, constrain it to the Y axis. I want to make like some little bars for the holder, and I'm going to hit S and scale to bring down the size here. S and Y to scale that in on the Y axis. This isn't going to be fancy, it's just going to be something simple. I do want to bring it up a bit, so G for grab, X, or Z for Z axis, and bring this up a little bit. And I think I'm going to cut this in half. So I'm going to click off to deselect everything, and then I'm going to hit B for box select or border select, whatever you want to call it, and drag a selection over the top portion of the cylinder. I am in vertex mode here at the upper left of my screen. So then I'm going to hit X and to delete vertices. And that looks fine to me. It's like a basic metal strap that it's going to be. I think I'm just going to leave it simple. I don't know if I'm going to get very fancy with this. So I'm going to solidify this. Drag that out. Solidify this to give it some thickness. So hit the space bar and type in solidify, and I'm going to click solidify faces. And then on the top bottom left, there's a little menu that opens that says solidify, and it's going to give me an option for thickness, and I'm going to just make this like, you know, just a simple or basic thickness for a metal strap. I think that works, that's fine. So then I'm going to unwrap this now. I'm going to mark seams around the strap so that it's easier to unwrap when I make copies of this metal strap here, and I won't have to do it for each one. So you'll see what I mean. Zoom in here a bit. I'm just going to go around the edges and think about how I would want to cut this strap open along its edges so that it would lay out flat like a piece of cardboard, so I can texture this on my UV map, which is down here in the right corner. So I'm going to go into edge select mode at the top left of my screen, click on edge select, and I'm just going to go around and select some edges here. You can do this your own way. There's like, you know, it's kind of a personal preference how you want to mark seams on your mesh to do UV unwrapping. And I do have a tutorial on UV unwrapping and editing, so I will link to that below if you want to learn more about that first. So anyway, I'm going to left click to select an edge, hold shift, then I'm going to hold my Alt or Option on Mac key and left click on this whole edge loop of edges on the side of the strap, come over to the other side, hold shift and select a couple of these edges here, and then I'm going to see if I have everything. Select another one on the left here. Now I'm going to, now that I have those selected, right click on my screen and choose Mark Seam. And if you can see, there's a purple line on mine, it might be red on yours, where it's marked the seams, which just tells Blender where to cut open this mesh to flatten it into a 2D UV map. So I don't know if you can see from this distance, but there are purple lines where I cut my seams, or marked my seams rather. So now that I have that, I'm going to check and see how it looks and I can already see a problem. I think I'm going to do that one as well. Mark seam. Okay, you just have to think about kind of logically how would this unfold without any issues. So I'm going to hit A to select all. I'm going to go over to the right side of my screen. I already have UV editor open, but if you don't, you would click this left little icon here in the corner of one of your panels, your screen sections, and choose UV editor, and then hold Control and middle mouse scroll to zoom in, over on the UV editor, and it looks like Blender already has unwrapped this for me in a default way. I'm going to do my own unwrapping just to show you. So with all of the faces selected that I want to unwrap in the viewport, I'm going to back over in the viewport, because you can't do this when your mouse is over on the editor. So in the viewport, hit U, the letter U on your keyboard for unwrap, and hit unwrap. And back over on the editor, the UV editor, I see that it worked out fine. There are no twisted faces. Everything's nice and square and laid out flat. So I'm going to go with this. There are the same kind of selection tools in the UV editor, which is vertex select, edge select, face select, and group or island select. I'm going to choose group island select to select all of these together. And I'm going to hold G for grab, and you can move it wherever you want. I'm going to hit S for scale to just bring it down in size a little bit and move it to the side here. So that works. And I'll probably end up having two textures here, two UV maps, one for the logs and one for the metal straps. So now that I've got that laid out, I can make copies of this metal strap, and I don't have to do this for each one. So I'm going to make sure I still have my strap selected, and I'm going to hit to copy. I'm going to hold Shift D, and I want to constrain this copy to the Y axis, so then I hit Y, and that means when I pull the copy out, it will stay on the Y axis and will stay in line with the first strap. So I think I'll do, maybe I'll do 3 of these just to give some extra mesh here to show a metal texture. So I'm going to hit another, so Shift D, Y to drag out another copy. And I'm not going to get this perfectly spaced. That's not my focus in this tutorial, so I'm just going to eyeball this whole thing to get this quickly done. So I've got these out there, and I feel like they're a little thick for my liking, so I'm actually gonna go back here and hit L when I hover over this to delete this whole strap, and I'm just gonna make the original one a little bit thinner. That's just me being picky, and that really isn't necessary. Okay, so Shift D to now drag on the Y, drag my copies out, Shift D, Y, and maybe a little bit further out, G, and then Y to grab that out, and then another Shift D copy on the Y-axis there. Okay, so that's a basic holder. I think I'll put a panel or something on the bottom just so that it makes a little more sense if there's something that these are attached to. So I'm going to select all, hit A to select all the mesh, and then I'm going to right click, and actually I'm going to go into tab into edit mode, tab to go to edit or into object mode, and then I'm going to set origin to geometry, and then hit Control S and hit cursor to selected. That just placed my cursor and origin in the center of my straps here, so I can get a little panel there that's centered with the straps. So now I'm going to tab back into edit mode and hit Shift A and res a plane, and then I'm going to hit S to scale it down to kind of want it like a rectangle, so S, Y to make this a little bit elongated, and then GZ to bring it down under the straps a bit, and then S scale because I do want it a little bit smaller. And I think I'm going to hit SX to scale it a bit in on the X-axis so it's a little more narrow, and I think I'll go with that. So, but I do want to add a little thickness to it, so I'm going to hit I'm going to extrude, so I'm going to hit E to extrude and Z to keep that extrusion on the Z axis up and down. And then once I have that, I'm just going to hit L and hover over the plane I just created and hit G to bring it down on the Z axis. So GZ to bring it down a bit so it doesn't clip the mesh that's above. Okay, so now that I have that, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put some seams here. So left click in edge select mode up here to click edges around, and I try to think of the best way to lay this out quickly without getting too fussy. I'm just going to go around and choose edges on the corners and around the sides, and that should do for laying this out. I'm going to right click and click mark seam, and then I'm going to select it all again, hitting L, hovering over and hitting L to select only this object, and then I'm going to hit U, unwrap, and then over on the UV editor, it unwrapped, but the bottom face is not necessarily the direction I want, so I'm going to clean up my UV map here a bit. I'm going to select everything because this is all going to go on one map, all of the metal parts, and I'm just going to rotate this face here by hitting R for rotate 90 degrees, enter, so I can move it around because it's kind of in the way, and G to grab and move this in, and then just going to select these by holding shift and clicking so I can make them a bit smaller. These I just hit G and X to constrain the movement, GX along the x-axis to kind of move these around. I might actually move this one. Right click and G to move this one under, and I think there's one more. Oh no, I only have 3. Okay, good. So I actually didn't need to move that. So I'll just leave this as is. And this will be my map for metal. So now that I have these all unwrapped, the next best thing to do would be to create a new image at this point, a new UV image so that when we get to baking in the end later on, we have a nice blank map to bake our texture, our metal texture for these straps onto. So in the UV editor at the top, select image, new, and give it a title. I'm going to call it metal parts. And then 1024 is fine. I probably could get away with 512, but I'm not going to change much here because I just want to keep this video focused. And so uncheck alpha because I don't need that, and click OK. Control middle mouse scroll or middle mouse wheel to zoom. And now I have my new texture image over there, so I can deal with that later. Next, I'm going to tab into object mode. I want to get these logs out, so I'm going to hit Shift A and res another cylinder, control middle mouse wheel to zoom out. I am going to go ahead and leave the caps on this one, cap fill to triangle fan, because that's the cleanest way to fill the caps. And then I'm done with those settings. I'm gonna right click and choose shade smooth, and then I'm gonna tab to get into edit mode, and then I'm gonna hit RX90 to just rotate that, and then S for scale to bring it down, and I'm just going to size this up until it looks more like a log. So SY to stretch it on the Y, S, and then SY, and bring it down a bit, so GZ to bring it down. I think I'll do like 3 logs, so GX to move it on the X axis, and I'm just using G and my axis letters to make this the right. Okay, that looks good. So now that this looks okay with me, I'm going to just quickly mark my seams. So to select a whole row of edges, I'm going to hold the Alt or Option key on Mac and hover the edge, the loop of edges. I want to go all the way around this edge here, and left click to select that whole group of edges, and then right click and mark seam. And because I'm going to texture those with the tree stump PBR textures, and do the same thing. Alt Option key, hold and left click on the loop of edges, right click and mark seam. And then I need to open up this, the rest of the cylinder, the side of it, to texture it. So I'm just gonna left click on the bottom, one of the bottom edges. There might be a better way that you lay out cylinders, but this is just what I plan to do for this, just to show you how to do the PBR part of this. So right click, mark seam, and then I'm going to hit A to select all, and it's already laid it out for me. I could go with this and that would be fine. That's probably what I'll do, is just go with this. But you could hit U to unwrap and get your own same thing. So I'm just going to leave it as it is. I'm going to scale this down because I'm going to have 3 of them, so I do want room for 3 logs. So that might be a good size. We'll see. Now I'm going to just, now that I have this log still selected, hit Shift D and then the X to constrain the copy to the X axis and pull out another copy of the log, making sure it's not really clipping. GZ to kind of pull it up a little bit. And that looks good. And then I'm going to do a third, so Shift D and pull it up, this time on the Z axis, so Shift D and then Z. And then I'm going to just grab it, G, and pull it in on the X axis a bit and get it in the middle, and GZ to bring it down some, so that it's realistically touching but not clipping, because objects don't really clip like that in real life. Okay, that's good. It's not going to be perfect because we don't have time. Okay, so now that I have my basic logs, if I wanted to add some realistic modeling here, you know, I could add, you know, hit Command R, add some other additional loops, and, you know, drag these in a little bit, but I don't really have time to do that to make them look realistic, so I'm just going to leave it as is. I'll leave the ones on that one. Okay, so basic stuff. Now to get the, now I'm going to actually drag these out so I can individually texture these if I want to. So I just drag out these little UV parts, and I might have to do some rotating here. Actually, no, I don't want to do that because I want to keep everything in the same direction for the node editing that I'm going to be doing. So I think I'm going to make these like that. Just hitting R and 90 to rotate these. I can make these a little bigger, S for scale, so they're a little higher resolution. And then for these, there's the other one. I was like, I'm missing one. I want to try to keep these together if I can, keep them in pairs so that I know. And this is actually going to be pretty low res because they're kind of small, but whatever, you'll make this a bit smaller so I have more room for these. Could be a little bigger there. I'm just hitting G every time I click on these so I can grab and move them around. You can do your UV editing however you want. This is just what I do. Okay, now it's all fitting on a map. And same thing, I want to go to the top right, image, new, call this the wood, or I'm going to say logs. Okay, now there's their new image. The other thing I want to do to get these ready to texture, and that is very important, is I want to assign these separate objects to material slots, because we need that. Material slots are what holds the properties and assigns them to the mesh. So with the logs all selected, I'm going to go to scroll down on the right in the properties area and go to materials, the globe on the bottom. Click the plus sign to create a new slot. Click the new button to create a new material and name it logs and click assign button. That you need to click the assign button to tell Blender that these logs over here that are selected are going to be assigned over to this slot. And this slot is going to hold certain properties for, you know, building our material and texture. So very important to hit the assign button. If you find that your texture is looking distorted in SL, you do want to check that you have hit the assign button, because it could be as simple as that. I've done that before. So now that that's set, I'm going to hit tab to go into object mode, click in on my rack and hit tab to go into edit mode. Make sure to hit AA, so everything's selected, and same thing, create a new material, hit the plus sign to create a new slot, hit the new button to create a new material and call it rack. And hit the assign button as the last step. And now these faces are assigned to that material slot. So now that we have our object modeled, I'm going to click save. You always want to save, and I'm going to save it save it on my desktop. As log holder. Save. There. Okay, now we're going to get into the PBR part of this.